Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for making time for yourself today to learn about financing long-term care. My name's Carrie Sweeney. I'm the director of the Retirement Center at UC Berkeley, and I'm glad to see everybody here today. Just to note, today's event will be recorded and posted on our YouTube station, and the slides will be shared with you after the session. I have the great pleasure of introducing Jullie Menack, who I met some time ago through a gerontology group that in the Bay Area. Jullie's calling comes from a deep commitment to supporting an individual's quality of life, independence, and dignity. And she's with an eye always on individuals' quality of life. She's devoted, an advocate, and works to provide client with a holistic plan of care that includes both personal and financial support. Jullie holds a MA degree in gerontology with a focus on home care management and has written and presented extensively the use of long distance caregiving, special needs trust, fiduciary ethics, and elder and dependent adult abuse. She plays an active role in professional associations and professional mentorship groups, and she's an all-around wonderful person, a real advocate and well versed in the in her profession. So to Jullie, I'd love to welcome you and have you go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be here today. When we did this before, it was in person pre-COVID, and now we've all migrated to being remote. So, but I guess we have people from all over, which you couldn't have had before. So that's really nice. Anyway, I just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm located in Oakland, California, and a care manager and professional fiduciary. And my company, 21st Century Care Solutions, serves primarily the East Bay and a smattering of other areas around the Bay Area. But today we're going to be talking about how we can get support from professionals in the aging field, personalized support, and also budgeting for care. I understand that this is your last or one of your last meetings. So you've learned a lot already, and I'm hoping to pull together some of the information you already know. So I'm not going to be defining certain things like what is assisted living, what is memory care, things like that. We're just going to be barreling in and talking about costs and looking at a scenario, and you might be able to think about how this scenario might apply to you or how some of the modified scenarios would apply to you. So we'll go from there. So as I said, we're going to be talking about professional advocacy and budgeting for long-term care. So the two kinds of professionals I'm going to talk about today are what used to be called geriatric care management. We've been rebranded now to be called aging life care professionals. So you might see either one. A lot of care managers have stuck with the old term because that's what people know. So what does an aging life care professional do? So that's a person who's an elder care specialist who can provide various types of support for you, either just consultation to give you some help figuring out what to do for yourself or for a loved one, or we can do a detailed assessment and monitor what's going on and continue to make recommendations. And we can get involved with planning and problem solving. I always like to say we're like a super user, someone who can be brought into the family, like an extension of the family with expertise in elder care to be able to coach you and to be able to actually even take over what the family might do. There are 8 knowledge areas that are considered part of aging life care. And as you can see on this chart, this comes right off the Aging Life Care Association, which is our professional association's website. So the main thing that care managers help with is on the upper right, which is health and disability, basically being an advocate either reviewing and making recommendations or actually taking people to the doctor and doing all the follow-up. I mean, we can work with people who have nobody, and that's really our sweet spot. And we work with families for sure, and very often long distance families who can't help the loved one who's far away. We come in and we can look at everything and, provide assistance for all different types of situations, whether it's a crisis intervention, whether it's making recommendations. We don't provide legal support, but it would be like making recommendations for maybe an attorney who should do an estate plan or help step in when there's elder abuse, all different kinds of advocacy, other types of legal resources. We interface with the family. We might make recommendations for housing, whether it's independent living, assisted living. We'll be talking about that a little bit more. And we also might help you take a look at the financial situation or work with a financial planner to make sure that the funds are going to last. So we help people who have all kinds of disabilities, whether it's physical, developmental, mental health, brain injury, for serious illnesses. It can be a person who's, some care managers support only the elderly, and others have expertise in working with people who have developmental disabilities, mental health issues, drug abuse, drug and alcohol abuse. So, there's all different types of care managers. And then the other type of professional we'll be talking about is a licensed professional fiduciary. But, a family member can also serve as a fiduciary. What is a fiduciary? And that's a person who can serve as your agent. And when you go to meet with an estate planning attorney, you would be appointing your agent under healthcare directive. You would be appointing an agent under a durable power of attorney. Those are for when you're alive. And you would also be appointing an executor, potentially an executor of your will, and your trustee. It gets a little complicated because people who have trusts just end up having a very simplified will here in California and probably other states. And the trustee can also serve when you're alive if you're incapacitated. So a lot of people have the misconception that the trustee is only for after you die, and it's really not. I work with a lot of people who have dementia and other cognitive issues, and they're not able to administer their own trust. And that's often where the bulk of their assets are. And once someone's appointed to be the trustee and the person isn't able to administer their trust, the trustee would step in. And the trustee and the agent under durable power of attorney have completely, they have different roles. I'm not really going to go into all the details here, but there are different roles and responsibilities. So what happens if you don't appoint someone? If you don't appoint someone, it could get more expensive. Your affairs may end up being court supervised. So when you're alive, if you haven't appointed your agents and you develop a disability of the type where you couldn't manage your own affairs, and in addition to not being able to manage your affairs, it's a psychologist or a doctor determines that you're unable to appoint someone, then you may end up being conserved. And there's been a lot of talk about conservatorship on the news, with the Britney Spears debacle and other problems. And I just need to tell you that conservatorships are not all bad. A person a family member or a professional would need to step in to take over a person's affairs. And the only real issue with conservatorships is that it's expensive because an attorney has to be hired to do a petition that can cost between $10,000 and $20,000. And then throughout the conservatorship, there are responsibilities. The conservator has responsibilities to the court for reporting. So the court is always looking over the conservator's shoulder. There are reports due, there are deadlines, there's all kinds of submittals that need to happen so that every penny is accounted for. So if you don't appoint someone, you would also, uh, uh, if you have more than 184,500, which is a small estate, in California, you would need to, your estate would need to go through probate. So, it's always best to go ahead and appoint somebody. So who can you appoint? Um, you can, most people appoint their friends or family members, but if you don't have a friend or family member who you're comfortable with, and I meet a lot of people who, they've appointed their family members, but now they're older or they're elderly and their brother or sister is older than they are, who they've appointed, and or just really unable to, or they're taking care of another loved one who now they don't have time. Or, or let's say you've appointed your children, but now you have grandchildren and your kids are super busy and they just can't they couldn't manage it. So other options would be a bank trust department. There are a number of banks who would serve as trustee and on some of these other roles, and they don't always serve as conservator or as agents, but every bank is different. Or in California, we have a license through the Department of Consumer Affairs to be a licensed professional fiduciary. So in addition to being a certified care manager, I'm also a licensed professional fiduciary, and I serve in all of these roles, including the ones where people appoint me and including the ones where the court would appoint me to be the agent for various individuals. So what does a professional advocate do? And this is really what a family member or a friend would do as well. But we can take a financial or a personal role. These are essentially the fiduciary roles. And it involves everything from banking and bill paying to helping somebody with their cash flow, making sure that everything's taken care of in their home, doing accountings. Typically, when a fiduciary gets involved, we account to somebody, either the person whose money it is, excuse me, or their family member or their attorney on an annual basis. We make sure their taxes are done, that their funds are invested safely, that everything's taken care of in their home, and we make sure that if the person passes away, we make sure that the funds are properly distributed among their beneficiaries. Personal support would include, oversight of a person's medical care, making sure they have adequate insurance. And I guess everybody knows Medicare is in open enrollment right now, so we're busy looking at that for our clients. We make sure that our clients have the proper public and private benefits. What type of Social Security are they on? Do they qualify for a higher pay of their benefits? Or have all their benefits actually been requested? Have they made sure that they're getting their UC Berkeley retirement or whatever other retirement they're supposed to get? And we also do care coordination, in other words, overseeing caregivers in the home or in any other setting they might be in. And the healthcare agent would also do medical decision making. So making decisions on behalf of that person if they're unable to, or with that person, collaboratively with that person. So why would you need a professional fiduciary? And I should mention that in California, we have a license. I don't have a list here of what other states have licenses. I can't really speak to other states, but the reason to choose a professional would be that you don't have friends or family to handle your affairs, or you don't want to burden them, or they just don't have the skill set, or they're too far away, like we talked about. Another issue is a lot of families, I hate to say this, but there's such a thing as family conflict. And if you know that there's conflict, it may be hard to choose somebody. So you'd rather choose somebody who's neutral. And that's what we are. We're just a neutral, experienced, qualified person who can act as your advocate. And it doesn't really matter what stage of life you're in. And to, make sure that whoever you're choosing is doing what they should be doing, and also potentially to be able to choose a replacement if there's a problem. Some people appoint a trust protector or a committee of their family and friends. So the family and friends don't have to do all the work, but they can at least oversee what's going on. That's something that if you're meeting with your attorney and you're creating a trust, it might be something to talk about. If you're feeling like you don't want to burden your family or friends with the whole job, but you can give them a smaller part of the job and they would still have a responsibility, which is kind of a nice alternative. So I wanted to just give you some resources. The Professional Association for Care Managers is called the Aging Life Care Association. I've given you the website. I've also given you the Professional Fiduciary Association of California's website and the Department of Consumer Affairs, which oversees fiduciaries in California, and that's called the Professional Fiduciary Bureau. These websites provide information on how to find a professional. They have lists of questions you can ask those professionals, and they also describe what the professionals do. So I think they're really helpful. You can also see the laws and regulations around fiduciary work and license verification on the Department of Consumer Affairs website. And I should also mention that care managers have a national certification. It's not a license. So you might find people calling themselves care managers or case managers, and it's always best to ask them if they're certified, because a lot of people put themselves out as care managers, but they're really not part of the Aging Life Care Association, or they're not certified. And I'm a big believer in the association and the certification because there are requirements for education. There are there are meetings, professional mentorship, and things like that, which I think make for a better care manager. And with regard to the fiduciaries, we are licensed by the state and we have to answer to the Department of Consumer Affairs. People can put in complaints. And they have to, they're taken very seriously. So, and again, we also have the professional association where there's major conferences and local chapters and all that kind of thing. So we're going to jump to the meat of this presentation, which is budgeting. So you've learned a lot about different housing options and, thinking about like where will you live as you age? Do you want to age in place? Would you like to move to an assisted living, an independent living facility? Do you have health considerations that might require that you live at skilled nursing? Or, what are your options? Well, you want to look at your budget. I think, some people may have very little choice and may not have a lot of money. And we didn't really get into this option, Carrie. I just realized we didn't put in the option of a person being on Medi-Cal and having that covered. So if I forget to mention it at the end, please remind me. Because I think we should talk a little bit about like the last resort. What happens if you truly don't have any money and what are your options there? I'll try to work that in. It's not in any of the slides or anything, but I'll try and work that in when I'm looking at some of the information. But some of the considerations on what you're going to be able to do is what is your net worth? What's your monthly income and what's the cost of the care? I mean, all of those factors are important, but of course, considerations also include your health and your, where you live and all that. So some of the options are remaining in your family home, downsizing to, aging in place essentially is living independently completely, where you live in your own home, whether it's the family home, an apartment, or an ADU. But you buy your own food, you take care of all your own affairs. You can still take care of all your own affairs in a congregate setting, but you're getting a little more support, like in continuing care retirement community and independent living. You might start out in an independent living portion of the continuing care retirement community, or just move directly to an independent living facility where you're still taking care of your own affairs, perhaps, but maybe they're providing food and there's activities for you, like you've discussed in your prior presentations. Or if you're needing a little bit more help, you might consider moving into an assisted living facility. There are different types of assisted living facilities, in addition to just a regular assisted living, where maybe you might get support with medication management or what are called activities of daily living, maybe, bathing, dressing, things like that. There's also specialized memory care facilities, and there's also board and care homes, which are essentially, they have the same exact license as assisted living, but they're smaller. Let's say, 6 beds or less typically. Or if you have high medical needs, as I mentioned, there's skilled nursing. So I believe you were provided in the past with a chart of senior care costs. This was updated for the presentation today by one of the individuals who I work with, who does placement in the Bay Area. So I would say these senior care costs are Bay Area, and I would say major metropolitan area for California. Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, I think. Try not to. Yeah, so these costs are a little higher than the ones you were looking at earlier, which were, I believe, nationwide. So I think if you're in a location that's more rural, even just outside the Bay Area, let's say you're an hour from San Francisco or more, and not in a major in the major metropolitan area, some of the costs will be a little bit lower. But I think, these costs are important to keep in mind that and I think some of the lower price ranges may be best for outside the area, or just very low cost places in the metropolitan area. So you can see, and I hate to say it, but home care is $40 an hour now. I mean, COVID really it just really made a lot of changes in home care. And I don't know if you can see that there's a number 1 here that it says typically with 4+ hour minimum shifts. Very hard to get home care for less than a 4-hour shift. It's even hard to get a 4-hour shift. So you're talking about a pretty high price. And if, I tell people that it's going to be $200,000 a year if you're looking at 24-hour care for home care or more. It can go up, as you can see on this slide, to over 300,000. So one would have to be a pretty wealthy individual to be able to maintain that for an extended period of time. It can be done, and it's, definitely home care agencies are very busy. So, but it's made it's driven a lot of people into more supported housing. So, there are prices here for adult daycare, assisted living, the memory care portion of assisted living, which is more expensive, maybe half again as much, skilled nursing, and independent living, as well as the continuing care retirement community. So we're going to jump into a case right now where we're going to look at some of these numbers and learn how to do an analysis of what the cost might be for this situation, given the person's net worth and their income. So Jennifer is 85. She was a school teacher. She lives in a condo. She, had a moderately, she's a solidly middle-class person, lives in a condo, nothing, fancy, but it's worth quite a bit now, worth $575K, but she's got aphasia, she's got weakness, and provides some difficulty when they're caregivers in the house. She gets upset, she hits them. She and her partner, who lives in their own home, they still own some show dogs. but they're at his house and she wants them to come home and she wants to stay home. She doesn't think there's anything wrong with her. And she won't even let the medical professionals come in to test her blood for blood thinner. She's always said she's wanted to stay home. Her partner, who is her agent, as well as her POA and trustee, hired us to do a care management assessment, and then they passed away. He passed away after 2 months. It was so stressful. We think that that's probably why he passed, but of course he had some medical conditions as well. So Jennifer's cousin was the backup on all the documents, thankfully, but they live out of state. They live in Florida, so the cousin has taken over, and they've asked us to help figure out where Jennifer should live, because the cousin's not here to help coordinate the care with the caregivers at the house. You know, the caregiver, the new fiduciary really needed to simplify things a little bit. So what did we recommend? So we used a decision-making tool where we identify different care scenarios. For example, living at home with care, continuing to do that, or moving to some different types of facilities. And we're looking at the costs of all of those. So the first thing we do is we calculate the person's net worth, which is basically like, what's their equity, what's their debt? Their net worth would be the difference between the two. We list all the monthly expenses and the income for this scenario. And then we subtract the expenses from the income, because let's say the expenses are 5,000 and the income is 1,000, then there's a certain, then there's 4,000 that needs to come out of savings. So then we do a projection using the savings about how long the savings will last. So the first thing is, okay, what is the equity? Step one. So there's a house, there are some cars, there's the bank account, there might be an investment account, there could be an annuity, then there might be debt, there could be a loan, then there might be certain expenses that, let's say we've already worked with, I don't know, there's some home care expenses that we know there's a bill, but it hasn't been paid. So we put that in as a debt, or anything else that you know you haven't paid off, credit cards, other things. So this is step one. So we have two scenarios really for the net worth. One is if she remains at home, and one is if she moves to a facility. So we've separated those because we can't really use the sell the home scenario if she's still at home. And we can't really use the reverse mortgage debt. We can't take that into account either. So we see that she has a total value of her estate without selling her home of 92,000 and change if she stays home. She really doesn't have much money. Just give you the answer to one of the questions, like, can she really afford to stay at home with 24-hour care with only having $90,000 and change in the bank? Or if she sells her home and moves to a facility, she has 275,000 in the bank after because she's going to have to pay off that reverse mortgage. As you can see, there's a balance on her reverse mortgage. So that takes a big hit. That'll be a big hit, but at least she will have 275,000. I'm going to just go back to, let's see, the scenario. I don't think that I showed you in the scenario, but we also put in the scenario that she has long-term care insurance, which many of you may have. So that's going to have an effect on which facility she might move to. Keep in mind that assisted living reimbursement for long-term care insurance is actually lower than reimbursement or payment for skilled nursing. So we'll see in the next slide. So we're back to the net worth. I'm going to go to first pricing out the different living options. We'll see that there may be that there may be an effect due to the long-term care insurance of how long her money could last. So the step two that we're going to go to next is that we're going to price out different living options. So we're going to add up the monthly expenses for each option, which, in our case, it's home with care, assisted living and skilled nursing. And so we'll add up her monthly expenses first, then we'll add up her income, and we'll calculate the amount needed from savings each month. And then we'll calculate the amount of time based on her net worth. We'll calculate the amount of time to deplete the savings, and we call that a depletion analysis. Some people call it a not as nice sounding term, a burn rate, right? So how fast are you burning through your money? And to figure out how much per month, we would divide that by the number by 12. So we're going to go through and look at her numbers here. And Carrie, let me know if I'm going too fast.
Well, I think it might be good, Julia, just to pause for a second. Yeah, that's a
Sure.
lot, and it really well laid out, but I want to see if people have questions. I have a couple questions here about how does long-term care insurance interact if you go on Medi-Cal, but if you want to go on Medi-Cal and you have a long-term care insurance policy, but you've depleted all your other assets. But let's wait to talk about Medi-Cal in a second. But does anyone have any questions or need clarification at this step? Just put it in the chat.
And I'm not seeing the chat, so you may have to read it for me.
Okay, sure. No questions, very clear. Thank you, Jill.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
these are a little fuzzy. They came out of an Excel spreadsheet, and I guess, but I think it's readable still.
Yeah, and people
Oh,
can zoom there a little bit to see. Okay, let's go ahead. We don't know, I no questions.
okay, so the three scenarios we're looking at for this particular case is that she stays home with 24-hour care, or we sell the house. So the home with 24/7 care, obviously the house isn't sold. She still has a reverse mortgage. On the two other scenarios, the house would be sold. So, and I don't know, can you see my cursor if I move my arrow? You see my
Yes.
arrow at all? Good. So as you can see, if she stays home with 24/7 care at $40 an hour, it's actually more than 25,000. I just rounded down a little bit. It's more like 28, but I just put that number in there. Okay, so it's about right. And then all the other costs, food, incontinence supplies for pharmacy, utilities, her home maintenance, caring for her dog, transportation, Medicare and the supplement, and if she had a case manager or fiduciary, this is right now she's got the family member fiduciary. So this would be care management, long distance family member. The care manager is really going to have to oversee all of the doctor's appointments, all of the work at home, and 3,000 honestly is kind of a median number, but for somebody with such high needs and without any family in the area, that's a minimum. I mean, it could end up being more. So you can see the total monthly expenses are 31.5. And with her income totaling, and that would include her long-term care insurance. You see, we're including that because there is long-term care insurance for care at home. Her total monthly income is around 6,500, but the amount she's going to need from savings each month is almost $25,000. You see that, 24,942, and she only has 92,000 in her savings. So we're only looking at 4 months here, people, right? She can't stay at home we got to get her out of this house, like pronto. This isn't going to work. So even though our client really wants to stay home, and as a lot of people do, and that's her plan for her whole life, she really can't. And she's not going to understand it because she has, oops, sorry about that. She has dementia, she's had a stroke. She has communication issues. So we need to now look at, does she have enough medical needs to go to skilled nursing, or is assisted living going to be her option? And I put in some numbers here for the cost of the facility. They could be very similar for skilled nursing and memory care. Basically, it's about the same. The then some of the other expenses, all the household expenses will go away, but she's still gonna have her pharmacy, she'll still have, medical insurance, things like that. She'll still have transportation. So we're looking at, now that we've sold the home, it looks like the amount needed from savings per month for going to skilled nursing is going to be lower than it is for assisted living because, as I mentioned before, the long-term care insurance will be providing more money towards the skilled nursing than it would to assisted living. It's just how most policies are written. I always tell my clients, or you need to look carefully at the policy. When we get a client who has long-term care insurance, we ask for a copy of the policy. We want to review it very carefully, see what the amounts are that are being paid and what the requirements are to qualify. So in this particular case, it looks like it would be 31 months until her savings are depleted in skilled nursing and only 19 months if she moved to until she moved to memory care. So it could be that a longer term option would be to go to skilled nursing. But, as we all know, skilled nursing is a medical model. It's not going to be as, there are not going to be as many activities. There are not going to be as many high functioning individuals. So it's a tough decision. In this particular case, we did move the client to skilled nursing. And she did okay there for a little while, but we ended up, because she had a lot of behavioral issues and the particular skilled nursing facility, this is typical, could be of any kind of facility, had a hard time managing her, and they didn't like using psychotropic medications. We had to move her to a memory care facility that was more friendly to her behavioral issues. So, it's always, you never know what's going to happen. And she did end up passing away before she ran out of money. But of course, you never know, and that's kind of where the Medi-Cal comes in, where, at a certain point, you might, a person might have to consider applying for Medi-Cal. And Carrie did bring up a question of, was the question, Carrie, person has long-term care insurance and they're on Medi-Cal?
And no other assets, can they even apply for Medi-Cal, or how does that work if they have nothing?
Well, that would be, Medi-Cal would be a good topic for another presentation.
Okay.
But the new change, there's been changes in Medi-Cal the last 2 years. So the current scenario with Medi-Cal is that you can have any amount of money in the bank. You can have hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. It used to be that the limit to get on Medi-Cal was $2,000. You couldn't have more than $2,000 in the bank. And then it went up about 2 years ago, I think, to 140,000. And this past January, I believe, it went up to there being no limits. But Medi-Cal does have criteria for income. And so your income needs to be below a certain level. And, if we have a minute later, I could potentially look that up, or maybe Carrie can look that up. There's there's an amount above which you wouldn't qualify. And Carrie, this is a good topic for, presentation, and that is, if you're in assisted living, you can use the cost of your assisted living against your income. So let's say your income is $5,000 a month, or, whatever it is, some number that's way above what Medi-Cal allows. If you're in assisted living, you can subtract the cost of the assisted living from your income to get to what your actual annual income is for Medi-Cal purposes. So if you're at a facility that's $10,000 a month and your income is $6,000, your income is basically -4, and you will qualify for Medi-Cal. So I can tell you that I have not had a situation where somebody, and I find that question to be very interesting because I would love to have a case like that to be able to figure that out. But I think that if a person has long-term care insurance and they're getting some thousands of dollars a month in, that would probably be considered income. And if you're in assisted living, or if you're paying for a certain amount of care, that could potentially be subtracted out and to get your net. The organization who really helps a lot with understanding these things and has fact sheets and explanations of Medi-Cal and all of these programs, and whether or not a person will qualify in some of these unusual circumstances, is called the California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. And it's the acronym is CANHR, CANHR. They have a great website, and they take phone calls. They have social workers ready to answer your questions. So if you had that question, and if I had that question about a client, I would be hopping on the phone and calling CANHR to make sure I was doing it right. Because I like to say that I'm a jack of all trades. I wouldn't say master of none, but not master of all. And when I have questions about complex Medi-Cal issues, they're the first people I call. So I just know who to call when I need to make these calls. So that's a really good question. And it could be that having a combination of Medi-Cal and long-term care insurance could work great. I mean, Medi-Cal actually covers a person's skilled nursing. It is a long-term care policy in a way for people in California. It
there,
could cover a poor person who couldn't afford anything and didn't even have long-term care insurance at skilled nursing. You go ahead, sorry.
I'm wondering though, do many assisted livings take a Medi-Cal as a payment?
So no, that's the problem. That there's something, and okay, so there's the California question and the nationwide question. I'm going to speak to California first. So in California, there is something called the Assisted Living Waiver Program under Medi-Cal, where there are a smattering, I would say, of assisted living facilities that accept Medi-Cal. There's a wait list. The wait list is currently closed. And it takes, once you can even get on the wait list, it might take several years to find a facility, and it may not be the facility of your choice. Like I know of maybe there are two or three facilities in San Francisco, for example, and only one is a big assisted living, and the others are very small boarding cares catering to certain very specific populations. And I only know of one place that I'm comfortable with in the East Bay. So it's very limited, and a person might have to move to some distant location. They may not have a choice of where they're going. Now, for other states, I find it really interesting. Every state has their own policy about their Medicaid program, because Medi-Cal is California's Medicaid program. For example, in New York, where I had family, I learned when we were looking for facilities that all kinds of great assisted living facilities took Medicaid. I had no idea because it wasn't the case here in California. So you would have to investigate that in your own state. So I guess that's the answer to that question. California, it's a tough one. It's not easy. So, taking a look, just going back to this scenario, the person could go to memory care or skilled nursing, but eventually, and part of the reason I think that we moved this lady to skilled nursing was we were thinking her money might run out and she might need to go on Medi-Cal. And if she was already at a facility, and this is kind of a practice tip, it's very hard to move to skilled nursing from one's home. This particular case that we had was maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and it was easier then to move to skilled nursing from home. Right now, though, you pretty much have to be hospitalized to even be able to set foot in a skilled nursing facility. And then you would be transferred under your Medicare. And once you're there, you could have your advocate could then help you transition to Medi-Cal in the skilled nursing. It's nearly impossible otherwise to get into skilled nursing directly from home. Again, the topic of another talk, and it is Canner's expertise. They give a lot of presentations on that topic. So I'm going to go to some other cases because I think that you might see yourself in one of these other cases. So let's say we have the same client for case 2. This person lives with their spouse and they go to a day program 4 days a week, a dementia day program. And there are other family members who can provide respite. And the only need for a caregiver is a caregiver for 8 hours at night. So the costs have gone down significantly. So we're going to look at that option. And then we're going to also look at the same client as the first one. But this person has a home that's worth quite a bit more, $2 million, and they have $1 million in the bank, and they don't have a reverse mortgage. So the question is, would the decisions be different in those cases? So this is case 2, where the person is at home with just 8 hours of care and the day program 4 days a week. And so we have the cost of home care has gone down a lot. It's just $9,600. And we've added in the Alzheimer's day program here, which is $1,600. So their care costs have gone down a lot. It's just a little bit over $10,000. So if you look at it, they still only have enough money to last just under a year. And of course they have a spouse. So, this could have an impact on the spouse if this much money is spent on their care. But on the other hand, they would remain home for longer and could be supported at home. And then these other options are still the same, but I added actually another option all the way on the right. And instead of the memory care being $15,000, I dropped it all the way down to $6,000. Okay, and that is possible in some outer areas to go to a boarding care facility or an assisted living facility in an outer area. And look at that. The money will last a lot longer. It will last 99 months or 8.2 years. So even though there might be a burden on the spouse to having to drive a little bit further out to visit their loved one, their money will last quite a bit longer. So that's important. And I'll be honest, I did not take into consideration the spouse, the Medi-Cal impoverishment rules. There's a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account. If somebody moves into skilled nursing and there is a spouse at home, there might be another scenario with the spousal impoverishment rules that would allow the person to go to skilled nursing, and the spouse would maybe be able to keep the money in the bank. That's not included here. Okay, so this is the final scenario, and this is the one where the person has a home worth $2 million and $1 million in the bank. So, if they're at home with 24/7 care, let's look at the second scenario here. They can afford 24/7 care for about 3 years. Now, that's still a lot of money. I mean, they're spending $25,000 a month, which you add it up per year, that's, over $250,000, $300,000 a year. They're spending that $1 million that's available from savings without moving from home. They're spending that pretty quickly, but that's an option. Or if they were to move to a facility, they would have more than enough to cover their facility costs for a long time. Assisted living, the high-end memory care, it would be 20 years. I have an error here. I think I did not take out the long-term care insurance. So when we send out the slides, I'll correct that. So the number of years might go down a little bit, but I don't think it's going to be significant because this person has so much money. Sorry about that. So that's pretty much it here. I'm open for questions. Happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you, Julie. And we can stay 5 minutes after, if that's okay with your schedule. Is it after the hour?
Sure.
Um, let's you want to maybe okay, we keep the slides up, but we get questions. One of the questions was, do long-term care insurance premium costs stop once you start drawing down on benefits?
Yes.
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 Okay. Anything on veteran care, disabled veteran aging benefits?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that.
Mhm.
I can't really talk about what a veteran would get if they're already in the VA and how that works. But what I can speak to a little bit is if the person was a veteran or a spouse of a veteran who served during wartime. So there are specific dates that are available, like if you look that up. And that could be, you know, Korean War, World War II, Vietnam. At this point, we have Vietnam veterans and their spouses. And I'm sure there might be other more recent conflicts that we've been involved with our country. So there's something called Aid and Attendant Benefits, which a lot of people aren't aware of. It's for people who are needing care. They either have care at home or they're in a facility and they haven't necessarily drawn down all their money, but they're close to drawing it down. So it's a benefit that's available to any veteran who served during wartime or any spouse of a veteran. And the spouses get less, they get about half the amount. And you have to have something like, and I don't quote me on the number exactly, $100,000 or less typically to your name to even apply. If you have more, they won't accept you and you have to wait a certain period of time to apply again. There are organizations like veteran support organizations who help people apply for the benefit, and they're very helpful in letting you know like whether you'll probably qualify or not. The last time I applied for this benefit, it took 1 full year to receive the money. And a check was provided that was retroactive to the date of application. So we did get a check for the full amount for that whole year, but it did take a year before we even knew if we were going to be getting it for this person. So yeah, it's a really great benefit. It's really important to be aware
of. Can you have a licensed fiduciary to just handle the estate after death?
Yes, very often a licensed fiduciary is like if, for example, I actually have a case like that where the client appointed a family member to be their trustee during life and me as their backup in case that person doesn't want to serve when they're alive. And then they appointed me after death. So you can basically speak with your estate planning attorney and set up your estate planning documents however suits you. And I do recommend, and I didn't really say this, but I think, you know, professional fiduciaries are not comfortable being put on documents that are created like pulled off the internet or by a non-attorney. It's really important that if a fiduciary is asked to serve, that we are provided with a document that was created by a professional attorney. And we also typically ask to have the opportunity to review the document before it's signed and finalized, like a draft.
That's great. And I
Because there
know
are definitely terms that, you know, are sometimes we might see things because we're the ones doing the administration. You know, we don't write these documents, but because we're doing the administration, we might see terms that make it so that we can't agree to take the case. I should let you know that if you are putting a fiduciary on your document, you should really ask them in advance. Many times attorneys will be like, oh, I know that fiduciary, I'll just put them on your document. It's best to ask. And it's also just to note that anybody you put on your document is not obligated to serve. Just because a name is on a document doesn't mean the person can't say, I'm sorry, I'm not available. So just keep that in mind, that if there are terms that make it hard to administer your trust, or, are onerous for some reason or problematic, and the fiduciary hasn't had a chance to review it, they are under no obligation to actually take it when the time comes. So it's better to check in.
And I know we talked about, Julie, putting down the name of the fiduciary, not the company. You're required to actually put the name of a
That's
person.
right. So
And
we're
maybe
appointed as individuals.
Mhm.
I ran into some problems once or twice, where the person put the name of my company, and the bank wouldn't accept it. So it's important. Yes, and you can just put the person's name and their license number. That's the best way to do
Right.
it.
And then list maybe several in case that person is no longer around or available or is
So there
retired.
are different, yeah, so there are different options for a succession plan, let's say, a fiduciary succession. So one option is that you would interview several people and rank them and pick your first choice for number one, and then on out. You might put your spouse as the first person, you might put your child as the first person, you might put a fiduciary as a backup, or if you're interviewing several fiduciaries, you would rank them. Another option is that and it's an option that I'm very happy with, because it helps me with my business, is that um, when you name a fiduciary, that you can also say the fiduciary will select their own successor. You can also say, I name this person and I would like my son or daughter to name their successor, or some other person. So there are a number of ways of creating a succession that's successful, let's say, so that you don't, you're not without. Or you can also, if your attorney agrees to it, your attorney can appoint a successor, things like that. So there are different ways of handling that.
And just in short, one last thing on that note, because we got a couple other questions, is if say you have a family member or your lawyer suggests, okay, name somebody to be your estate manager, someone nearby that you know, a family member, but you don't really want them to manage it, like you mentioned earlier. You don't want them to handle the details. You can list them as um, and the word you used for that, you can list, say, your niece or your daughter in collaboration with the fiduciary as
Right.
a yeah.
So that would be a trust protector, or you can appoint a trust committee if you have more than one person. And that person's job can be to, if they feel like what the fiduciary, whoever you've appointed the fiduciary, is doing is, um, they're not comfortable with it for some reason, they can request that the fiduciary step down. Or if somehow something happens to the fiduciary, perhaps they're the ones who are appointing a replacement.
Okay, great.
And I just should mention that they would also be the person reviewing an annual accounting and maybe receiving the fiduciary's bills. I always like to have someone to send my bills to. So it's nice
Yeah.
to have a trust protector or trust committee.
This question we get often, if you move into a facility and run out of money, that people do they just kick you out? Maybe you could address that in a how does that work if you run out of money and um I
In
know some
assisted
operate.
living, in assisted living, it's a problem. Yeah, yes, they might evict you. I mean, there is no requirement that they keep you. There are no provisions for that. And
And
uh,
most don't have social workers to help manage to find you a place, but some will help. And you can ask that when you go into an assisted living, what are your services available to help replace me if I can't live here
right.
anymore?
I mean, hopefully you have some planning, it's like you will know this um a certain amount of time in advance and start planning for it.
Yeah.
It'll either be yourself or your fiduciary will have to look at that, and we'll have to say, okay, we need to do something, some period of time before that happens. Um,
And get a feel for
I've had to move, like I had a person who was um at a facility and they were going to run out of money, and we ended up fortuitously being able to get them into the skilled nursing portion of the facility and get them on Medi-Cal. But that's something where you might need help with that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, you can get a feel for that when you go to get on board when you go to look at assisted livings, you can ask it and then ask it again and try to look ahead at your money to plan for that, like Julie says. If someone's getting an inheritance, would it make a difference if the money goes into the trust? Would the money affect eligibility for I think they say Medi-Cal, not Medicare, Medicaid or long-term care insurance?
So a set amount of money doesn't no longer affect Medi-Cal in California. I don't know about other states.
Right.
However, let me just think. But it would be, yeah, if you received income from that money. And one thing we didn't talk about was, and we can't really get into it, but there is, it would affect if you're on SSI, it would affect, impoverishment type benefits. If you're on, SSI, which I imagine most retirees are not on, but there could be a family member who's on SSI. And if they were to receive an inheritance, they would lose both their SSI and their Medi-Cal. And so some planning needs to be done. And very often, and I can speak to this, if you have for example, a disabled relative that you're wanting to leave money to in your estate plan, and they're on benefits such as SSI, you might want to consider a special needs trust. So that's a type of trust that is administered um, uh, by a trustee. Often a fiduciary often does it because the rules are kind of complicated to make sure that you can maintain the person's benefits. But you might consider leaving that money to them in a special needs trust so that they will not lose their benefits. So that's the one situation that I know of when somebody were to receive money in a trust that they could lose their benefits, but typically not Medi-Cal.
What's the range of fees for a care manager or fiduciary services?
It depends on whether we're just doing consultation on an hourly basis or if we're doing everything to take care of a person, and it can range, from a few hundred to many thousand per month. So it
Right.
just depends on what we're doing. And even when I take a new case, it's very hard for me to tell a person, we don't know exactly what we're going to be doing for you. Hard to tell you. I can tell you my hourly rate, and that's pretty much it. So, and in terms of hourly rates, it varies around the country. But for care managers, I would say it ranges maybe from like 150 to 250 an hour for the professional, and fiduciaries might have a similar range.
That's helpful. Um, this is another veteran question, so I don't know if we can address it. Might a wife be eligible for veteran benefits for wives of combat veterans if her husband is deceased?
Yes. So the aid and attendant benefit can also be applied for a wife. They're just going to be receiving less. I believe the amount for a veteran, a single veteran, is something like 2,300 a month. It's not that much, but it definitely helps, especially if you're running out of money. And for a spouse, I believe it would be approximately half that. I don't really know the exact number off the top of my head. And then if there is a spouse who's married, if there's a veteran who's married, their amount might be higher than the 2,300, maybe like 3,000 and something. So it's in that range, but absolutely a spouse of a deceased veteran can and should apply.
Can you give a quick recap summary on the qualifications, certifications, or licensure of fiduciaries?
Sure. So, and I can do it briefly. I haven't really checked it in a while. So I'm
Okay.
going based on my recollection, and it's definitely on the Fiduciary Law Board website. But I believe a bachelor's degree is required. A specific field is not required. A certain amount of education in this field, in this area, I believe 30 hours is required. We have to have a live scan, background check. There are pretty onerous application fees, and an exam has to be taken and passed. So, and then every year there's an annual renewal and requiring a certain number of CEUs. I believe it's 15, and it needs to include ethics, and I believe diversity is a new requirement that's been added to that. For care managers, believe it or not, even though we're not licensed, the requirements are actually a little more onerous. You need to have a degree in a related field. So, for example, my master's is in gerontology. You cannot just jump into the care management field without a degree in a field that's somewhat related. And then you need to have a certain number of years working under or with a care manager. A certain amount of supervision needs to be included. And then there's also an exam. And that gets renewed every 3 years with a certain number of CEUs that you have to supply and documentation of continued supervision. And supervision can be actually case consultations, like I can just be I can talk to a colleague or one of my staff, and that's considered my supervision, and their supervision is the same, if they talk to me or if they talk to each other. So, that's kind of an ongoing process. So we don't have a problem with that, but I believe it's something like 50 hours a year. So you do have to, you can't be completely isolated. So
Super helpful. Thanks. And we can send a link to the fiduciary association just for California. I think they have that information on there.
yeah, and I should actually mention that there's also a national organization called the National Guardianship Association for people serving as a fiduciary. I'm just looking up at my certificates here because I wanted to make sure I had the right name. Um, and for people in other states, that person might be a member of NGA. And
Great.
there's a certification as well. There's a guardianship certification organization as well, and many California fiduciaries belong to that as well.
Great. Yes, and we can send this as a follow-up to folks. I don't see any more questions. Yeah, Jean mentioned it's great information, but wow, a little heavy. Yeah, it's a lot. And that's why we're doing these sessions. It's the goal of them is hopefully not to leave you too depressed, but you know that this is the scope of the information and that there are professionals out there to help, and also that you know a little bit about the context so you know to plan. So this is just the first step to know that you that it's important to plan in advance, and that way you can have sort of your ducks in a row. But if you have questions, I'm going to also send the social work phone number for Canner. I did give you those fact sheets at our last session. So, but the California Nursing Home Advocacy Group, they're just fantastic. Um, what are the cheapest states to move to? Um, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of the country.
And I
No,
do want to say, just kudos to all of you. You all, it sounds like you all worked for the university. I'd say that, people who worked for organizations that provide a pension, possibly have the opportunity for long-term care insurance, all of that are in much better shape than a lot of other people. So not to say that it's going to be easy, but it's often, people who have a government pension or a university type pension are definitely have an easier time.
that's great. Lots of legs of the stool, as we
Yeah,
say.
exactly.
Eddie. Well, we're getting lots of compliments, very informative, and thank you, very informative. So you're getting just lots of love
Thank
coming
you
from.
all so much.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. Um, it's just wonderful connecting with you. You're an excellent resource, and I really appreciate you giving us your time today and your expertise to folks. These slides will be shared afterwards, and I also include a couple of those phone numbers. A video of this will be posted on our YouTube station and also included in November's Center Express newsletter, so look for it there. This is the last of our sessions, so thank you all for coming today. There are also recordings on our YouTube for estate planning with our lawyer and also advanced medical directives. So you have a lot of resources that you can rewatch. And thank you again. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, Julie. I really appreciate it.
You.
Round
My
of
pleasure.
applause. All right, everyone. I think that's all. No more questions. And everyone take care and have a good afternoon. Thanks, Julie. I'll see ya.